Well, good afternoon and welcome back. That was a good break. It was well needed after intense talks. Um, so in the afternoon, we'll go into a more vineyard and wine kind of approach in these works. Some mitigation strategies that maybe I tried out. So the first speaker in the afternoon is Dr. Justin Tanner. He's going to be speaking about the effects of crop level adjustment on the non-structural carbohydrate allocation in grapevines, and see if that's giving us any better news. So I'll turn it over to Justin.
All right, thanks everybody. Hope you had a good lunch. I know it was a nice long break. So as Con mentioned, today I'm going to be speaking on the effects of a management strategy, specifically adjusting crop level through cluster thinning to see what effect that has on red blotch virus, the plant physiology, and the effects to fruit quality. So as Con mentioned, or maybe he didn't mention, that I'm a postdoctoral scholar working in his lab, and I feel very lucky to be able to be a part of a cool lab that works on such important topics such as this one. So just a bit of general background. The main economic impact of red blotch, and probably the reason why this is a topic of discussion today, is it reduces fruit quality in wine grapes, delays ripening, and is pretty widespread, documented across the United States, presumably spread through infected plant material. As well, now we're understanding a little more about vectors. And there are several reports that mention reduced net photosynthesis, higher accumulation of sugars in leaves. But the main impact that we're concerned with is the reduction in fruit quality, mainly lowering berry sugars and anthocyanins. So to kind of answer this question that we've set up, can we adjust crop level to help improve the fruit quality in red blotch infected vines? So the thinking is by reducing the amount of crop load that you have, that potentially maybe you could funnel more of the sugars into these fewer sinks to result in higher quality berries. So to look at this, we set up a 2-year experiment where we looked at some plant physiological parameters of plant water status measured by stem water potential, leaf gas exchange to understand the photosynthesis, and then we looked at sugars in the leaves and the shoot sap for only the second year of the study, that was 2021. And then components of yield, berry primary and secondary metabolites. So the crop level treatment that we applied to this was one of 2 levels, either untreated crop load, this is full crop of 45 clusters per vine, and this is labeled UNT and the rest of the presentation for the untreated crop level, or a reduced crop level of 10 clusters per vine, so pretty severely reduced. So in hopes that by having such an extreme reduction, that we might be able to see some benefit from reducing the crop load. And then so when we applied that also with the 2 virus statuses, we have a 2x2 factorial designed experiment where each of these 4 boxes here in the illustration represents a different treatment combination. And there were 4 vines per treatment for a total of 16 vines in the trial. And then the crop level treatments that I just showed in the previous slide were applied randomly to both uninfected and infected vines. The crop level treatment was performed on clusters at the pea size stage at about 7 millimeter diameter berries. So this study was conducted in Oakville at the UC Davis Oakville Station. And on the left side there you can see the weather for the site over the 2 years. The bars represent the precipitation and the lines represent the growing degree day accumulation. So one thing you notice between the 2 years is 2020 was slightly hotter, slightly drier. And so at the Oakville station, the soil series is a clay loam, Bell's clay loam, and then all the other experimental variables were held even between the treatment groups. So all the vines were Cabernet Sauvignon Clone 7 on 110R, and they were trained to a vertical shoot position system. So during the growing season, we measured stem water potential and leaf gas exchange from late summer to harvest every 2 weeks. And then the results of that data is presented in the table to the left. On the far left column, that's the treatments, their main effect, and the interaction between the two treatments. And then the second column there on the left, you see the results for the stem water potential, which relates to the plant water status. And so for crop level, there was no significant effect on the plant water status. However, for virus, we've seen that the infected vines had less negative values, meaning that they had a better plant water status, which was quite surprising to us. But it will make sense as we move forward. And then also highlighted, the box has shifted a little bit, but the years were significantly different between 2020 and 2021. And then as far as crop level, we did see an effect on the stomatal conductance, that's the column labeled GS, in 2020 only, and then in 2021, we've seen a significant increase in the net accumulation of carbon for those cluster thin vines. So then at 3 points during the season for the second year, 2021, we looked at what are the carbohydrate levels in the leaves at 3 points during the season. This was measured at pre-veraison, veraison, and mid-veraison. And so you can see there in the box labeled A, that represents the total non-structural carbohydrates, or the sugars, the sugar concentration in the leaves. And there we can see that cluster thinning had no significant effect on decreasing the level of sugars, which were always elevated in red blotch positive vines, similar to the work we were seeing with the remote sensing. It's definitely the same trend that we are seeing here. And then specifically in individual sugars, sucrose as well as fructose were both significantly higher in red blotch infected vines compared to uninfected. Again, no effect of cluster thinning on reducing these level of sugars. And then looking at the level of sugar that's moving in the sap, moving from the leaves, hopefully into the fruit sink, we sampled right at veraison a 7-centimeter stem segment that was supporting the lower berry cluster. So this was a destructive sampling that required us to harvest one shoot at veraison from each of the data vines. And so from this data, again, it kind of confirms the results we've seen in the leaves, but it was an inverse relationship where the uninfected vines had much higher level of carbohydrates moving through the sap, and the infected vines had a much reduced level. This was particularly evident in A, which is the total carbohydrates, and D, which was fructose levels. So then looking at the components of yield, obviously cluster thinning, what you're doing is essentially cutting off the clusters which will later become the yield. So not surprisingly, as highlighted here in the yield table, cutting off the clusters significantly reduces your yield. And so that was you can see evidenced in the cluster number. This was the thing we were directly manipulating with the treatment. However, you see for virus status, there was not a significant difference within a year. So if you look at 2020, the relationship was not significantly different, although red blotch positive vines had slightly more yield, not significantly different. And then the same trend we observed the following year in 2021, where slightly more yield from red blotch vines, but was not significantly different. So again, these were the data from 16 vines in the trial. So when we looked at combining those with greater replication data from both years, from 32 vines, we're able to see I don't know how to use this pointer very well, but you can see here in the mean data that from both years, we had enough to see that there was a significant relationship. Red blotch actually increased the yield, which was a surprising finding. So then moving on, it's like, well, what we really care about is the fruit quality. So we looked at berry primary metabolism at several points during the season. In 2020, it was at veraison, mid-veraison, harvest, so 3 points. And then in 2021, we looked at 4 points, which was pre-veraison, veraison, mid-veraison, and harvest. And so for, we have 2020 on the left, 2021 on the right. So in 2020, we've seen there was, by harvest, there was no significant difference of berry weight with either of the treatments. However, there was a transient effect at mid-veraison where virus increased the berry size. It didn't last to the end. And then again in E for 2021, we've seen a similar trend that there was some transient effect of virus increasing berry size as well as cluster thinning. But by harvest, again, it was not a significant difference. And then to sugars reported in 2020 under the B, we've seen the Brix level was significantly impacted by virus status. Cluster thinning did not have a significant effect in this year, but in the following year, 2021, we're able to see a significant impact of both virus status and the treatment of cluster thinning. However, I'd like to point out the blue line there is the cluster thinning red blotch negative vines. Those values were around 27 Brix when that group was harvested. And then for the unthinned vines, they were 25 Brix. And then for both of the infected vines, neither one of them reached that baseline of unthinned red blotch negative. So you see there for the green line, that was the cluster thin red blotch positive. They came in around 22.9, and then for the unthinned red blotch, they were like 22.5. So it made some small difference within red blotch, but did not alleviate the symptom of reduced sugar to uninfected levels, even at such an extreme reduction in crop. For results of pH, we've seen a significant influence in 2020 of cluster thinning only. So you've seen that the cluster thin vines had higher pH at mid-veraison and harvest, 2020, and then in 2021, we've seen also the same effect where we had cluster thinning only was influencing the pH. And then for titratable acidity, by harvest 2021, there was no significant difference. But for 2021, cluster thinning did slightly, it made a significant difference there. So anthocyanins, it's been reported again that anthocyanins are decreased with red blotch infection. This was the case that we've seen in 2021. There were significant differences. However, in 2020, it was a warmer year, and We suspect we had some anthocyanin degradation. We didn't see significant differences there. But in 2020, where we were able to detect significant differences, it was only caused by the virus status. Cluster thinning was not able to improve the anthocyanin level. So that was evidence in the total anthocyanins, total 3,4-hydroxylated, 3,4,5-hydroxylated, and total methylated. All were much lower with red blotch infection. So in regard to flavanols, also this was taken from harvest berries in both years. There was no significant difference, which is not surprising because we didn't alter the leaf area. Both cluster thinning groups were under full canopies, so the exposure was not different, and we didn't see any differences in flavanols in either year as well. So some of the takeaways that we learned from this trial: by removing clusters, we were not able to redistribute sugars. We're not able to funnel more into fewer sinks as we would have hoped. So this was evidenced by the fact that we had we're not able to affect the sugar level in the leaves through crop thinning, as well as sap levels were still much lower in sugars for red blotch infected, regardless of cluster thinning. And then at harvest, cluster thinning significantly reduced yield, but was not able to increase the Brix or the anthocyanins to the level that we've seen in uninfected vines. So with that, we can say that we can't recommend cluster thinning for red blotch because it cannot compensate for the lack of translocation imposed by the virus. So what does this mean, to growers who get paid for fruit? Extrapolating the yields that we got and the price penalties that we've seen in Oakville for red blotch infected vines, they can have a huge influence on the amount of money that you're able to put in your pocket as a grower. We're looking at, a price penalty of $4,800 for red blotch infected compared to $8,200 for fruit from clean vines. So coupled with, the amount of crop that is lost due to cluster thinning, that's a huge difference in the amount of money that you'll be having, either, $6,500 or $31,000 if you have a full crop load for red blotch infected vines. But this doesn't tell the whole story because we know that it also costs money to produce vines, to produce the crop. And so I was able to pull some numbers together, cost estimates that are represented in this upper horizontal dotted line here, which represents like the overhead cost to produce an acre of crop. And so what this really highlights is that the more red blotch you have, and that's shown here on the x-axis, the incidence of infection, the more impact it has on your quality, which is going to directly impact the amount of income that you have, which is shown in the green line here, which would be your total income minus your expenses. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody that's helped me on the project, to USDA NIFA for providing funding, to the department for allowing us to conduct this work at the Oakville Station, for everybody in the Culturel Lab that's helped along the way to get this data collected and get us to where we are today. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention and turn it over to any questions.
I have a couple questions from online. The first question is, what would be the correlation of 45 clusters per vine, 1 cluster per shoot, 1.5 clusters per shoot? Yes,
this is about 1.5 clusters per shoot. It really matters the training system, but for us, that was like 12 and a half shoots per side to get, like 40, it was like 30 shoots, so like 15. It's about a cluster and a half per vine.
And another question, do you think you can find different results if clusters are removed earlier than pea size, maybe at bloom? And also, did you remove clusters or shoots as well?
Yeah, so let me answer the last part of that first. So clusters and shoots, so shoots were not removed, leaves were not removed, more than just homogenizing the vines to make sure that they had 45. You know, removing vine clusters earlier may have an effect, but not in regard to red blotch. I believe that the impediment posed by the virus in translocation is not overcome by the practice. And the pea size is really just a good standard practice because the clusters are easy to find at that stage. You're less likely to miss them. And, you know, it's a practical advice you can give for when a crew is moving through. Make sure you are able to find those clusters to be able to remove them. So it's practical advice to remove it at that stage. Yes, sir.
Did you see a difference of the canopy between the area that you cleaned the fruit and the area that you didn't?
Yeah, so the question is, was there a difference in canopy with cluster thinning or without? And so that data is shown right here in this last column, leaf area to fruit. So with just, so these are looking at the single factors. There was no significant difference except for in the vines that we removed the clusters. There was 3 times more leaf to fruit ratio in those vines which we removed the clusters because we didn't adjust the leaf level in any of the treatments. They were all the same. Yes, sir.
What price reduction was there for red blotch fruit compared to non-infected?
Yeah, so I used the level here of the price point that we've gotten over the last couple of years, but definitely this is a negotiation. So let me bring that up. The level that the cost reduction that we've seen, there it was either we've gotten $4,800 for fruit from this block that had the infected vines, and mind you, this wasn't 100% infection. And then versus like a clean block, we're getting 8,200. So as a negotiation, maybe your skills are better than us, but that's the real world numbers of what we're getting. Go ahead.
Would you get a higher price if you thinned on the red blotch positive?
So even if you were like, if the person buying was like testing the bricks, it was still not that big of a difference. We're talking about like 22.5 versus 23. And then in the thinned healthy fruit, sure, that was 27 bricks compared to 25 for the unthinned. But then you got to balance the yield itself. Like we're talking about cutting out more than 3/4 of the crop. So if you're not getting that much more, it does not warrant the loss in yield. Yes, George.
Justin, very good presentation here. So I'm curious about your results. Do you believe like if you do a same trial on the wide varieties, actually red blotch is going to be beneficial because the yield might be higher and the water stress is going to be lower?
Yes, I think it really depends on the market. Obviously, in the Oakville area, quality is at a premium, and that's why they command the higher prices. If you're in a production area that's more focused on volume, where you don't have these like great price penalties, you know, I think, yeah, then it probably could be a wash and definitely less important. But in areas where you're seeing such a huge reduction because, you know, they're expecting the highest quality, it has a severe impact. right, well, with that, I'll thank everyone.